Hi, I'm Evan B. Howard, and this is my lecture on the art of living in religious community. We long for authentic community, and I think it's simply human to do so, because the Trinitarian God who created us is community in unity. This Trinitarian God is also the founder of the Christian community. When we as Christians express or experience something approximating authentic community, we frequently describe it in the language of God's foundational models of Christian community, the followers of Jesus and the early church. And this is especially true of monastic folks, old and new. Thus, Francis of Assisi, after hearing the story of the simplicity of Jesus and his disciples, traveling from place to place, preaching the kingdom of God, cried out, "This is what I wish. This is what I seek." Thus, also, the preceptum, or rule of life of the followers of Augustine of Hippo, begins by proclaiming, in the first place, and this is the very reason you have been gathered together in one, you should live in this house in the unity of spirit, and you should have one soul and one heart centered on God. And then, you should not call anything your own, but you should have everything in common. And thus also, Shane Claiborne, speaker and advocate for new monasticism, after telling of his experience of community in Philadelphia, he recounts, "At the time, I had no idea who St. Francis of Assisi was, but somehow the divine whisper that he and those radicals heard in Italy in the 13th century was very familiar. 'Repair my church, which is in ruins.' Now, hundreds of years later, a bunch of young dreamers was leaving the Christianity that smothered them to find God in the abandoned places, in the desert of the inner city. I felt so thirsty for God, so embarrassed by Christianity, and so ready for something more. It felt like we were reinventing the early church for the first time in 2,000 years. Modern culture has produced many collections, but few real communities. One of the strongest communities in human history, at least one of the longest lasting communities, longer by far than either nations or economic institutions, have been religious communities. The Buddhist Sangha, the Jewish synagogue, the Christian monastic orders. When human beings choose to order their lives together around transcendent values, something powerful happens. And what is interesting is this powerful perseverance of religious communities is not a function of any particular community structure. The fact of the matter is, religious communities come in a wide range of shapes and sizes. In my lecture on what is monasticism, I mentioned the variety of forms of Christian religious life. Large dormitories of monks, distinct hermitages linked by common sanctuaries, and so on. New monastic expressions of community are equally diverse. I have seen single buildings that house a community of 10 or 20 members. I have seen rural communes with land and buildings to support their members. I have seen communities established in various houses in a single neighborhood. I have seen virtual communities, keeping their common values and practices while dispersed throughout the globe. The form of community varies. The commitment to community is common to all. In April of 2016, I visited a new monastic group in Glasgow, Scotland, associated with an organization called Interchange, a Christian order among the poor. Interchange happens to have written commitments. And here is how their commitment to community sounds.
A life of community will mean for me support of my fellow team members in prayer, love, and reconciliation. Expression of my gifts as a complement to my team members. Love and encouragement as they work to develop and use theirs. The willingness to share my belongings within the guidelines prescribed by each team. Faithfulness in serving on the team and under the authority of the team director.
Support of fellow team members, expression of gifts, willingness to share, faithfulness under authority, love. What strikes me as I hear these commitments is how it strives to re-embody some of the values characteristic of historic monasticism. Community values we would do well to consider today, as we all long for community. So, what I would like to do in the rest of this lecture is to offer a few of my own comments regarding these values, and I'll expand and modify them slightly, and ask what we might learn from the history of monasticism's old and new about community living. So, first point, religious community life involves sharing. The interchange commitment specifically mentions the willingness to share belongings. And many monastic groups, both old and new, simply consider it a part of their life together to share their economic life together. Augustine, as you heard, specifically mentions not considering anyone's things of their own, but holding all things in common. And here's how the Glasgow team describes their own experience of their economic sharing.
So I think in old monastic, when you look at monastic monasteries and so on, where single nuns and monks live and used to live, I guess they pool their resources more because they're in that same building, they're sharing together. I guess in our expression is that we don't all live in the same building, but we do try and pool our resources together in other ways. I kind of think of the first few chapters of Acts where it talks about they did that, they brought all their money together and kind of shared it out in many ways, and that kind of expression of doing that with the housing was really it brought us together actually, I felt.
And then now I don't own a car and Claire doesn't own a car, but then one of Ruben and Kath have kindly, our companions have kindly put us on their car insurance, which is really cool. So because they want the car to be used, and so we get the use of that sometimes, which is, it kind of makes sense, but it's a form of generosity and sharing and stuff, which we really appreciate.
But community life is not simply about sharing money or possessions. Other things are shared. Religious communities share housing, or at least a common geography, so that it is easy to meet together. Religious communities share values together, values they have openly discussed and agreed to. Religious communities share decisions together, giving mutual input into the matters that affect the group. And, of course, religious communities share worship times, share meal times, and they share play times. But it is more than just a sharing of time, space, and possessions. It is also a matter of sharing hearts.
I think that was something that was really attractive to me, and before I joined Interchange, because I'd had another experience of mission overseas and was quite isolated in that, and so the idea of community was really appealing. That that you're in a context as a team, and that helps sustain you. And I think it's it kind of really, it's really helpful, and just helps your health to be like shouldering each other's burdens, carrying the burdens together and encouraging each other. And there's a great strength, I think, in being community as we serve here.
Mm-hmm.
Community life involves sharing. There is a sense in which the more sharing, the more community. Second, religious community life is a mix of the expression of gifts and the submission to authority. Notice those commitments: expression of my gifts, serving on the team and under the authority of the team director, love and reconciliation. There can be some tension, even in the living out of those three phrases together, yes? Sometimes, and particularly in the early stages of entry into a monastic community, there is the need to sacrifice our gifts and just learn to serve. Later on, our real, authentic gifts emerge through life in the body. You know, the more I study monasticisms old and new, the more I see this delicate balance of structure and relationship. Basil of Caesarea specifically draws attention to the passage on gifts in his rules. Benedict emphasizes the authority of the leader. Augustine begins with the emphasis on love. Now, in another video, I will address the history and character of leadership in monasticisms old and new. Suffice it for now to say that just as monasticisms have different forms of housing, so they also have different forms of leadership. Some religious houses are quite monarchical. The abbot or the mother superior holds all the power. Although they are, of course, if they are good leaders, they know how to listen and to care. Other houses, however, are very democratic, and they make their decisions by the community together. I have seen sometimes communities make the mistake of trying to address relational problems with structural solutions. You see, what makes a religious community strong, as I have seen it, is not the particular form of government, but rather whether all the members of the community are comfortable with the form and live into it relationally appropriately. This, I think, is one reason why a season of novitiate or apprenticeship is so important, because prospective members, as they come in, must come to understand and then to agree with how things are done, or how things are decided here in this community. You see, if we fail to address these kinds of matters right up front, we simply end up hurting people in the long run. Number 3, finally, religious community is an environment of love. So much really boils down to love, does it not? Love and reconciliation, the commitment says. Love and encouragement. You know, this is all I really have to give in a community. My love. And I think that is part of the interesting feature of religious community, and why I think it's so powerful and so persevering in time. A religious community is not linked simply by bonds of friendship. It is not a bunch of buddies getting together to do something fun and exciting. Indeed, in some religious groups, close friendships are frowned upon. Besides, what kind of buddy relationship can you have if you're silent? Similarly, a religious community is not bound by sexual attraction or family ties or things like that. The love we offer one another in a religious community should transcend worldly relationships, should transcend family bonds. It is the love of Christ we give. It is a love similarly available to all, because we are free from special attachments. Now, of course, in many new monastic expressions, and some old, or some new old, shall I say, families and singles live together, and they learn to navigate the waters between these different expressions of love. But whether in old monasticism or in new, we find ourselves thrown in front of one another and cast upon God to form us into a person and into a community of holy love. Again, as one member of the Glasgow Interchange team put it,
I think when you start becoming, when you move to be part of an intentional community like this, it's a bit like a marriage. It's a bit like a marriage. It's your warts and all your kind of your strengths and your weaknesses come out far quicker, and you can't just let them be if you want to be sustained. So it's like, Maura and I, we just share everything. We're very much aware of what our strengths and our weaknesses are, and I think in that light, there's kind of the pressures living are kind of that much greater, and therefore it's kind of brought me to my knees more often to God. The pressures and the joys and the pressures, good and the bad, have kind of brought me to God more frequently, and I guess it's quite a humbling experience to be part of a community like this, because you can't hide your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses and stuff. If you truly are seeking community, come out, and you can't hide from them. And so ultimately it can be quite a humbling experience, and I think that in itself has brought me closest to God, because it's like, God, I can't do this without you.
So there you have it. Religious community involves sharing. Religious community involves a mix of structure and relationship. Religious community is an environment of love. These are essential principles for monasticisms old and new. I think they are also important principles for us in life in general, for we all long for community. And so, with these principles in mind, I hope that you, whether living alone or whether in community, have a wonderful day.